Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dal, and looky what we got here. A brand new beta build for the War Within, which is releasing in roughly 3 weeks away from now, with rogues finally seeing some kind of a damage buff. There's been a handful of classes that hasn't really received a lot of attention over in the beta. Mages, Death Knights, Hunters, Shamans, all of those classes have seen quite a bit of attention, quite a bit of time in the spotlight, but classes like Rogues, Demon Hunters, and Priests haven't received nearly as much as everybody else. And Rogue has been one of those classes that's been severely undertuned for multiple weeks now, but it looks like we're finally getting a little bit of attention. So the question is this going to be enough to keep rogues relevant, confident, and feeling good, feeling competitive in the next expansion? I kind of want to take a look at deep dive at all of these recent changes to see if that'll be enough to have rogues potentially climb out of the dumps. As always, if you guys want to see more regular videos like these on class updates for the War Within beta, be sure to follow the channel. Otherwise, let's do a bit of a deep dive in what has been my main class over the last few expansions. So starting things up, we have new updates to hero talents. Not the craziest of updates, but definitely some improvements here and there. Starting with Fatebound, probably the most passive one. Every time you use a finisher, flip a coin, it either lands on a heads or a tails. Tails, it does a cosmic damage, which counts as a finisher, and there's some interaction for Outlaw as it can cleave with your Blade Flare, which is exciting. And the heads just gives you, as a rogue, a damage buff. This damage buff previously was kind of mediocre. They did increase just basically the coin mechanic, and the way that it works, I guess, just for anybody that wasn't aware, is every time you use a finisher, you flip a coin, it either lands on a heads or a tails. Basically, if you can get the coin to flip on the heads multiple times in a row, then the heads continues to gain stacking buffs. So the coin has been recently buffed up. The coin stacks up in damage, but the bottom part, the base starting point of the heads coin, which is the damage increase, is now 10%. This is much better than 3%, which is what it was previously. Kind of felt a little underwhelming, and this actually may in fact made the heads coin a little bit better in AoE, making it a lot more competitive to its other alternative options for at least Outlaw, but to some degree Assassination also, even though Assassination rogues will likely end up playing Deathstalker because it just has such a good eviscerate synergy, but Fatebound may actually end up being a decent option for them as well. The other hero spec that's gotten updates is Trickster, mostly damage buffs for both Outlaw and Subtlety, primarily from the Nimble Flurry ability. So part of the Trickster is it has this like finisher type of aesthetic, but also a cleave playstyle as well, with Nimble Flurry amping up Blade Flurry damage from 15% to 20%, which again makes it a little bit better. For Subtlety, it's a little bit more of an interesting talent that allows you auto attacks, backstab, shadow strike, and eviscerates to strike enemies that are within near your position, within near your location, up to 7 additional targets for now 50% of normal damage instead of 40, while Flawless Form is active, and Flawless Form is a buff that gets procced either from using Secret Technique or from proccing Unseen Blade with single target abilities like backstab or shadow strike. So you can technically have kind of like a Blade Flurry as cleave as Subtlety, which to me was very, very exciting, but there's still inconsistencies with this ability. The range of it, I think, is not generous enough. Unless enemies are really, really next to each other, almost holding hands, sometimes you can have an enemy like a couple inches off to the side out of a big trash bag, and you still won't reach him with this Nimble Flurry ability. You have to position yourself in a way where you're trying to kind of like be almost in the middle of a trash group. But if somebody's a little too far away from mobs, like they're not really connected next to each other, it doesn't seem this ability consistently reaches them every single time. If they can fix that, I think Nimble Flurry could be a very interesting playstyle for Subtlety that allows them to focus more on single target damage that cleaves everybody else. But the inconsistencies are still a little bit unfortunate. Also, we had a little update towards the ability, the capstone of Trickster of Coup de Grace. What they've done with this one is previously, and this has been a thing that rogues have been doing for a couple of builds now, for a couple of weeks, we actually would untalent out of this ability because there's some early numbers that suggest, and this is just beta numbers, so take this with a grain of salt, of course, but the early numbers suggested that this capstone actually causes us to do less damage for both Outlaw and Subtlety. Plus, there's also other features of this that are just uncomfortable to play with, so what a lot of rogues used to do is untalent out of it, and then hit apply changes. Blizzard changes so that you can no longer do that. You have to put a point into coup de grace. So it's a talent that people were trying to get rid of, that we're stuck with it. So coup de grace actually did get a slight few changes. Like, first of all, it's gotten apparently a new sound effect, and it has a new animation with its charge, because this ability has a charge at 25-yard range. Look at that. It's kind of cool. I think the biggest problem with coup de grace, though, besides, you know, the damage reduction that it causes, the actual mechanics of coup de grace are not super comfortable to play on a rogue. As a subtlety rogue, when you use your ability of Shadow Dance, you want to sink as many Shadow Strikes and Eviscerates during this crucial ability window, and every global counts during that window. Coup de grace right now does not do enough damage to justify this animation lock, where you would rather, as a subtlety rogue, spam more Shadow Strikes and Eviscerates in that window. Therefore, it just doesn't feel great. Same thing can be said about Outlaw rogue, because you have those Vanish Crack Shot, spam between the eyes, and get free dispatches during those windows, which are crucial for cooldown reduction. So being locked in animation means you're losing a couple of seconds off of your cooldown reduction, means you have less adrenaline rush uptime, and overall less damage throughout a dungeon or a raid. It isn't ideal, plus it has this like charge mechanic. Most rogues don't associate an eviscerate with a charge, so it's very jarring every time it happens. But the ability of coup de grace by itself isn't bad, it's just I think it doesn't work when it's replacing an eviscerate or a dispatch. But what if it replaced an entire other ability? And this is where I was thinking about, like, what other abilities could it replace? But what if it replaced your killing spree as an outlaw rogue, or if it replaced your secret technique as a subtlety rogue? Killing spree already has an animation lock, but the ability does a ton of damage, so this coup de grace would actually be a less intrusive, less animation lock of an ability, and less sporadically bouncing all over the place, but like a better version of killing spree. But if it did slightly more damage than killing spree, it'll be a perfect replacement of an ability. Or for subtlety rogues, you can have the secret technique be replaced by coup de grace. Secret technique by itself already has a delay in its damage, like you'll strike out at the target and then you'll see these shadowy images of a rogue strike from left and right, so there's a bit of a delay to begin with in that ability. But the animation lock, I guess, could be at least put towards the back end of a Shadow Dance window, where you could still gain the immediate damage rather than delayed damage of a secret technique. But you could also plan when you want to use coup de grace as an ability, and that would play so much better. Because at least, like, if you know there's an animation lock coming, you can at least plan ahead for it. The problem arises is when this animation lock happens when you least expect it, and that's what really creates this uncomfortable feeling for both subtlety and outlaw. Plus, thematically, the entire Trickster playstyle focuses on amplifying your finishers: killing spree, secret technique, dispatch, eviscerate, or any other finishers rogues use. So I think to have that ability, coup de grace, replace your strongest hardest hitting finisher as both of those specs would make thematic sense. Plus, it'd also be out of your way rotationally from your basic combat abilities, backstabs, eviscerate, shadow strikes, so you can still use them how you want them, and still will be able to plan around using coup de grace in very specific ways to maximize its effectiveness. I think it would be a better option. But I also would like to hear your guys' comments below. What do you think about potentially having coup de grace replace your killing spree, or coup de grace replace your secret technique over an eviscerate? Because Trickster by itself as a hero spec isn't terrible. It's just when you get to use coup de grace, it could definitely feel like it's in the way as part of your basic combat rotations. Besides Trickster changes and me going on this coup de grace rant, Deathstalker also did get a couple of buffs as well. Quite a significant amount of them, in fact. So for Deathstalker, there's a lot of new things. Clear the Witness AoE damage from your Phantom Knights has been amped by quite a bit. This does mean that you will likely end up maybe using Phantom Knights in single target rotations after your next Phantom Knights after applying Deathmark. Essentially, you'll start incorporating your Phantom Knights as part of your basic, even single target rotation, which may feel kind of awkward at times, because Phantom Knights by itself as an ability doesn't even do that much damage, but maybe it'll be okay. It is an interesting talent regardless, because I guess it does give you some natural cleave, while also allowing Phantom Knives to generate additional comp points, which I think is I guess a nice benefit either way. Deathstalker's mark damage itself too, the ability itself, the plague damage, has also got buffed up, and the damage that applies for your ambush or mutilate is increased to 40%, which is a significant gain for single target more than anything. It still is a nice buff, not amazing in AoE, but it is still a buff regardless. Then we have the talent of Fatal Intent that as of this build now does literally 0 damage. I don't know what they did with it. That is broken, so now we have a trait of our Hero Spec that does actually 0 damage. So that's cool. Lingering Darkness as a trait has also been buffed to be 20% increased nature damage after Deathmark expires. This is essentially a Dragonflight Season 2 tier set, which was notoriously the least like tier set. So it's weird that they're buffing it instead of replacing it entirely. It's still not a well-liked trait to begin with. However, Symbolic Victory damage buff is kind of nice. It does improve your Venom damage by 15% every time you shiv, which actually can be kind of good because you can amplify your shiv damage with the Capstone of Darkness Sight by quite a considerable amount. So if you include a Symbolic Victory in there, that could be good. And plus, assassinations generally are doing quite a significant amount of damage with their envenoms in single target. So this is a direct damage increase, at least in pure single target situations. The talent of Moment of Despair has gotten a buff where it not only provides you with critical strike chance for Phantom and Cryptic Tempest, but also now critical strike damage, and the damage part is the one that is new. Damage and critical strike damage moments are very, very interesting, and I generally do like them. Critical strike damage can be very, very strong on rogues, since rogues have natural affinity for critical strikes from either their class talents or spec talents. So that's actually an interesting one that could maybe be good in AoE. The talent of Singular Focus, which allows basically all damage dealt to other targets around your marked target with the Death Mark ability. Basically now they take a little bit more plague damage whenever you deal AoE damage, and that damage goes to the marked target. So I guess it's a nice little buff, but not a great AoE trait. Besides this, the actual specs of rogues have been buffed up by a decent bit. Assassination, all ability damage increased by 4%. Auto attack damage also amplified by 10%, which overall is a slight buff, but not the craziest. Both Envenom and Cryptic Tempest, also the finishes of those, have been amplified by 10% as well. Out of all the specs of Rogue, however, I always felt Assassination throughout this time on the alpha and the beta has always felt relatively familiar and did go through a drastic amount of changes over in War Within, which I think is generally a good thing. Like, normally players want to see their classes evolve, but I kind of like the Assassination playstyle in Dragonflight specifically, and it's good to see that the core benefits of it, the stuff that I liked, didn't change a lot going into War Within. I still would have liked to see a lot more done for the hero talents because I feel they're all still kind of underwhelming in terms of performance as well as what they do for the spec, but I generally like the way that Assassination kept a lot of its core, which is not the same I could say for Outlaw or Subtlety to some degree, and I do like the way Assassination currently feels right now when playing around with it over on the beta. Then we have the spec of Outlaw, also got a bunch of buffs. All ability damage increased by 10%. All auto attack damage increased by 10%. Both Sinister Strike and Pistol Shot damage has also been increased by 10% as well. Specifically, it says Sinister Strike, not ambush damage. So if you don't like playing around the Hidden Opportunity and Audacity talents and an ambush build, there may be some opportunity for you to play a Sinister Strike build, like the one combined together with Keep It Rolling, which could be a little bit better after this change. Blade Flurry, the initial damage, which has this like initial cleave, also has been increased by 50%, but the overall damage of it is kind of meh, because Blade Flurry itself, the cleave that it does off of single target abilities, is a huge portion of your damage, whereas that initial, when you first turn on Blade Flurry, is a lot lower. It's about 2% of your overall damage, so it's not a crazy buff, but I guess I'll take it. The talent of Sleight of Hand has also been increased in terms of its chances to grant you additional buffs every time you roll the bones. While this one may look good, it actually is not that great of a buff, or it really does nothing, mostly because of the other talent on the opposite side of Loaded Dice. Loaded Dice uptime is super high with how often you can reactivate Adrenaline Rush as an Outlaw because of like your basic cooldown reduction mechanics of the spec with Restless Blades. Finisher moves reduce the remaining cooldown of many of your rogue skills by 1 second per combo point spent, so Outlaw Rogue focuses on building and spending combo points as quickly and efficiently as possible. Then you also have one of the buffs from Roll the Bones, which provides you with not this one, but another buff that provides you with cooldown reduction, so you get even more cooldown reduction whenever you spend combo points into finishers. Therefore, but as it stands right now, it just doesn't seem like a very, very good option. What is a good buff, however, is a buff to Count the Odds, which has had a 50% increase to the opportunity for you to be able to get additional buffs whenever you use abilities such as Ambush, Sinister Strike, or Dispatch, which have a 15% chance, up from 10, to grant you a buff of Roll the Bones that you don't already have for 8 seconds. This is actually kind of huge because in your opener, you can actually build up a lot of buffs off the bat. So our roll at the beginning I got Ruthless Precision with a couple of ambushes. I'm just going to go through my opener here. So if you're able to build a bunch of buffs in the very opener, very good buffs, you could then lock them in for 30 seconds. So I got 4 buffs there, and if I was talented into keep it rolling, you could just extend them, which means during an opener, it's an opportunity for a rogue as you spam Sinister Strikes, ambushes, bunch of dispatches, especially with the crackshot play, so we can get a bunch of dispatches off of the Between the Eyes resets. You're able to get a bunch of buffs really quickly, press your keep it rolling, lock them in, and have yourself almost like a 5 buff guaranteed opener in a lot of the cases. Finally, we have the spec of Subtlety, where we haven't seen a lot of changes for this spec, mostly just an auto attack damage increase, as well as a buff for your 2 main finishers, Eviscerate and Black Powder, which is a nice buff. But for the most part, it doesn't necessarily change the essence of Subtlety, which is one of the specs that I found to be actually kind of competent when it comes to the raid testing we did a couple of weeks ago. And I felt like the spec was actually in a decent spot in terms of just its overall, at least rating standpoint. It's a little harder to gauge how well it's going to play in Mythic Pluses, but at least for raids and single target, it seems to be capable of putting out quite a significant amount of damage, which is always good to see. That being said though, as a class of rogue, it still is up in the air whether we will be in a good spot going forward. It's also hard to tell if any of these actual class buffs actually made it all the way into the beta, because the damage of rogue still feels in some cases a little bit underwhelming. That being said though, it is good to see that rogues are receiving some sort of buffs and even talent adjustments, and hopefully we'll see a lot more of those because it's really needed. But at the end of the day, I do want to hear what you guys think about all of these stroke changes. Are you satisfied with the way that rogues are shaping up to be over on the beta? Or are you like everybody else, not necessarily happy and are still hoping that a lot more changes are yet to come? Let me know all your thoughts on how you're feeling about this class in particular in the comments down below. As per always, I want to thank all of you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys enjoyed. If you guys did enjoy this video or found it informative, go ahead and give it a like. I would very much appreciate that. And join our Discord community. Link for that down in the description of every single one of the videos. I would love to have you guys join it. And like I said, give me all your thoughts in the comments down below. Thank you all, and I'll see you guys all in the next one.